Welcome to today's conversation, where we in a moment will be joined by a strong voice on equality and a role model for many looking for equal opportunity. You're watching Let's Call, a collaboration between Danish sustainability platform Tomorrow, and I'm Alexandra Musavisade, partner in London-based Tortoise Media and a proud partner of Tomorrow. In this series of talks, which will lead up to the inaugural Sustainability Festival in Copenhagen next September, we will explore the key and urgent issues that need to be addressed now in order to set us on the path for a more sustainable future. We need systems change, and we need a tangible action plan. We need accountability. And to kick us off in this first conversation and give us perspectives on what we know about the fight for a sustainable transformation, we thought, let's call Julia Gillard. Julia, it is amazing to have you with us today, and we look forward to exploring the link between gender equality and climate in particular. And I'd like to kick us off with the question about what we know from research is that from the stats is 85 gigatons of CO2 equivalent could be reduced or eliminated by 2050. And that can be achieved by giving women education, the right to or access to education and family planning. But yet, and so much more, and yet we seem so far away from achieving the goals set out in the SDGs. We've had this debate for decades now. So I'd like to ask you, how can this still be the case? How are we, why are we still having the debate? And why is the gap still so big?
It is the discussion we need to have. One of the best buys, of course, for climate change is girls' education. And we've known that for some time now. And given how long we've known it, it is frustrating that we haven't better invested in girls' education and made more progress. Having said that, pre-COVID, I think the world was waking up, and many governments, including the government of the United Kingdom, were putting girls' education at the forefront of their overseas development aid priorities. So that was fantastic to see. What I'm clearly concerned about now is, as a result of the pandemic, that we stall and the rate of progress reduces, or in fact we go backwards. We know from earlier epidemics like Ebola that when schools close, the most marginalised children, and that tends to be the girls, are at risk of never making it back. And so now's the time to actually double down on efforts to make sure that when schools are back in full operation in developing countries around the world, that the girls come back too. I think there is a moment of opportunity here. Of course, we're in a huge global crisis, both a health crisis and an economic crisis, but there is an opportunity for us to think about the way we want to rebuild economies and rebuild priorities following this pandemic. And I'm hopeful that we can see evidence come to the fore in that building back. And if we do, that evidence will lead us in the direction of greater gender equality, greater female empowerment, girls' education, and of course, more action on climate change.
Thank you, Julia. I think if I could just go back on one of the points that you made, that you're seeing and you're hopeful about the change that may come. What sort of leaders are you looking to when you look at the world, both in the developing world, but also the developed world? Who do you think, and who are you observing right now who makes you hopeful, and where you're seeing some action being put in place that will lead to those changes that you just described, that you thought and hope will will materialize?
I think that there are a few trends that are giving me some hope, as well as some inspirational individuals. Of the trends that are giving me some hope, this pandemic, I think, has reminded all of us that government really matters. The quality of government matters. In fact, it can be the difference between people living or dying. And in the lead up to this pandemic, I think many people around the world, many voters, thought to themselves, oh, government doesn't really make that big a difference to my life. What do I care about who the national leaders are? Why should I bother going and voting? I think this has been a big lesson in democracies matter, governments matter, participating matters, caring about the outcomes matters. And that's a positive trend. I mean, the second positive trend, I think, is that it's put science and evidence in the centre of public decision making. We've had the questioning in the lead up to this pandemic of, oh, why should we listen to experts? What do they know anyway? Now, right around the world, people have been hanging off the words of chief medical officers and scientists to work out what's going to happen next. And I think that new respect for and new focus on science gives me some hope too. In terms of individuals, I'm really glad that we've been having a discussion about how well women leaders are doing during this pandemic. I'm thinking of people, of course, like Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern in my part of the world, Chancellor Merkel, Erna Solberg in Norway, and the list goes on. I'm not a believer that men's brains and women's brains are somehow inherently different, but we are socialised differently. And women have shown a kind of strength coupled with empathy that I think people want to see in a crisis like this. And I think they're good leadership traits to be valuing and to be focusing on and to be discussing. And we're doing all of that right now because of the pandemic.
It has been so striking that the countries that have had a relatively, more robust dealing with or better outcome from COVID have been female-led. And that is interesting to see, and hopefully that can be an inspiration as people go to voting booths around the world in the elections that are coming up in the next 12 months. Of course, we have an election in the US where we are hoping that everyone will have the ability to vote without obstruction. But talking about the US, not only the US, but also looking at the world in terms of the inequality that women face, as you know so well, these numbers, and you work in metrics a lot. You focus on evidence-based arguments for where the issues lie with the gap and the issues with equality. But when you look at the 1.3 billion people who live in poverty, 70% of these are women, right? And when you look at food production, you have most of the food production, 60 to 80% of the food production is by women, yet they only own 10% of the land. So there are these sort of pervasive long-term structural issues, especially in the developing world, that are problematic if their voice is not heard and the leadership is not there to draw that out and give access, as you said, to education and equal rights and to health, etc. But what I really wanted to get to was sort of where we sort of started, was the link between that inequality and climate change, as evidence and research shows. Trying to right that issue with inequality for women would have a very big impact on climate, just in terms of family planning, just in terms of management of households, and a long list of things that I know you're very aware of. But when it comes to call to action to make this just very, very clear to leadership, governments around the world, how would you express that link so it's very clear? If you will, could you walk us through that journey from we narrow the gap and we get to much better climate outcomes? I wonder if you could talk a bit about that.
Sure, I'm very happy to talk about that. I think if we're looking at that journey, It does start with girls' education, because we know that an educated woman will choose to marry later. She'll choose to have fewer children. Research from the Brookings Institution has shown that if every girl on the planet today had a high school education, that peak global population would be 2 billion less than we are anticipating it to be. So these are not trivial figures. These are important figures when we're talking about an overstressed planet and climate change. And then when it comes to land use, family, household, consumption decisions, decisions in local communities, if women are not included, then the perspectives that they will bring to decisions that have a big implication for climate change will not be there at the table. There's no point men sitting around tables in some parts of the world talking about climate change and addressing issues, for example, through food production sustainability, and not including the women who are doing the work. That's obviously not going to add up. It's not going to be a practical way of implementing change. And then more fundamentally, in some ways, or even more fundamentally, you know, I'm just a huge believer that merit is equally distributed between the sexes. And if we're looking at a world where 70% of the nations on earth have never been led by a woman, then we've got to be saying to ourselves that there are barriers that are stopping women of merit from coming through. Many of those barriers are still there. That's why we're seeing a slow rate of change. And given how big the issues are for our planet, why wouldn't we want the best people in the decision-making forums and leading us to a better future? And if we don't have an embrace of inclusion and diversity, including gender diversity, then we're simply not going to have the best decision-making structures. They won't include the best people, they won't have the fully informed perspectives, they won't be able to make the decisions that drive the biggest amount of change.
And exactly on that point, I wonder, I'm curious what you think, whether we've sort of reached a crossroads on that right now. And maybe because all of these fault lines in societies are being exposed by COVID, the climate issue is ever more urgent, right? And we have a moment where we're sort of a reset moment in time. And I'm just curious if you think that, you know, where is it, you know, what is it we need to do? You know, we can have hope, yes, but do we need to get angry, or do we need to get out on the streets? Do we need to, you know, how do we create that step change to accelerate exactly what you're talking about, that is so clear in the numbers that you're citing, that there is, you know, there is still this inequality. So what do we need to do now to try and right those inequalities and right the wrongs?
Yeah, I think we've got to practice what we preach and be as inclusive as possible. There is a lot to be angry about, there's no doubt about that, but anger doesn't change hearts and minds. What ultimately changes hearts and minds is people become persuaded that they can see a future where they and their families are going to be better off. And, you know, right around the world, because this health crisis has brought with it a huge economic crisis, many people are saying to themselves, you know, how are we going to live? You know, what are our kids going to do in the future? How are we going to come back from this? And if we can point to a vision that is inclusive, that is better for the planet, that has sustainable and shared growth, where families can see that their children can prosper without hitting historic burdens of sexism and racism and other forms of exclusion, then I think we can bring more people with us. And ultimately, this is a numbers game. More people have to get interested, have to get involved, active, voting, prepared to endorse governments that will bring policies that have big changes embedded in them, prepared to use their consumer power to reward companies that do the right thing and punish those that don't. prepared to look for media outlets and sources of information that are reliable, that are bringing them the evidence so that they can be knowledgeable actors in this change agenda. But that comes, with a form of inclusion and persuasion to get it all happening. So I think the onus is on all of us to be prepared to get out, to talk, at the grassroots level, as well as the more decision-making table level, to get everybody on board for this change. I think, our world has been so much divided in so many ways in the run-up to this pandemic into us and them, with heated exchanges between the two groups. One big reset button I'd like to see us all press out of this pandemic is to recognise that we face this pandemic as human beings, bonded by our common humanity. We were all at risk simply because we are humans. We're all at risk because we're humans on a planet that's overstretched and overstressed. We need to face climate change with that same understanding and make it a shared journey.
If you don't mind just digging into that a little bit, when you say we are at this reset moment, and we share a passion of metrics, you and I'm just wondering if this reset moment may be a point in time where, and it's something I believe you've talked about previously, is the putting a value on women's work, right? The discrepancy between the work and gain for women, whether it be housework or whether it's work in various sectors that are just, not giving actual metrics around the value of what women do in societies, and having that carry an actual value into the way that we calculate growth and the way we measure our societies. Do you think this reset time is a time where we start to put metrics around things that have not been measured before, such as the value of the work that women do and do not get paid for explicitly?
I'm all for using this as a time to renew how we look at things. I mean, one thing that we are doing as a result of the pandemic is we're looking again at caring work and at some of the occupations that have kept our societies going, the truck drivers, the train drivers, the people who have kept us supplied with the things that we've needed when the going's been tough. And let's be frank, coming into the pandemic, many of the jobs that have been most vital to our societies are jobs that pre the pandemic people would have looked down on as low status, low wage jobs. And I hope that the pandemic is reshaping how we value that work, how we value caring work. And I hope it's prompting the debate that we need to have about the value of domestic work. It disturbs me when we see statistics like even in households where both the male and the female partner work full time, women disproportionately do the domestic labour. And when that has been heightened by lockdown restrictions and homeschooling, whilst both partners have stepped up to do more, the fault line, the pre-existing fault line has been added to. So the woman is still doing more of the increased burden that the family shares. Now, we can calculate all of that. We can point to it. And if we can lay it starkly bare for people to see, I'm hoping ultimately that we can change behaviours. One part of that is to be rethinking how we want the world of work to be post the pandemic. Many occupations, of course, do require personal attendance, but a lot can be done from home, are currently being done from home. How much of that do we want to take with us and build in for a future of greater diversity and greater gender equality at work?
Yes, it seems that now could be the time where we actually would try and put some numbers on exactly that, what is being done at home, and we can see that the value and the burden that women are carrying. And I think that, as you said before, it's clear that in this pandemic, we see that women are carrying a greater degree of the burden at home in terms of caring for children, caring for families and making sure that it all is being held together. So it would be lovely to see that emerge in a set of metrics that we could try and apply to putting value on what women are doing and the burden that they carry. So one sort of final question I'd love to ask you today, and it's like how we want to sort of close the conversations that we're having, is to come away with sort of the one takeaway that can help inspire us all listening to this conversation that we're having now, and that people can take with them in their everyday lives, which is if there is one thing that we can all be doing today, what would that be in order for us to have a better tomorrow? What is the one thing that we could all do, not just governments and CEOs and heads of organization, but as individuals, as citizens who need to be living in this world tomorrow? What can we do today?
I think each of us can absorb the gravity of these days that we're living through. I know that they can be wearying as we go through them day after day, but this is one of those lines in history where people will forever talk about the days before the COVID pandemic and the days after. And if we think of it like that, then each of us can make a contribution to defining those days after. And of course, people with power can do that through the decisions they make, but individuals through their own actions can make a difference too, by thinking about what they want to see in those days after. And then at a community level, a workplace level, a social club level, a mother's club level, whatever it is, starting to talk, persuade and work through the groups that they're in to be part of shaping the days after. Ultimately, politics, business, we get movement in our society because large numbers of people make decisions that they want to see change. And everybody can be part of that process. And we need everybody to be in it because it is about the weight of numbers and then the weight of activism and energy that comes through those numbers.
Thank you, Julia. So well said. If I may, just one last question to you is love to hear what you're currently working on. You have a book out. You could tell us a little bit about that, sort of what's on your plate these days. How does the rest of 2020 look? How do you think we'll be spending the next 12 months?
Well, I'm home in Adelaide, Australia, living my life through this machine that we're talking through now, which is an unusual experience for me. Normally, I'm always on a plane and always travelling. With my fantastic co-author, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, I do have a book out at the moment on women and leadership, Real Lives, Real Lessons, where we've taken the global research about women and leadership and asked 8 fantastic women leaders, does this research hold true in your life, and come to some conclusions about that and some advocacy points and actions. I'm continuing my work with the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London, my work with the Global Partnership for Education. And here in Australia, I lead as chair of the board of directors, Australia's most recognised mental health advocacy body, Beyond Blue. And there has, of course, been record demand for our services at this time. I'm hoping in 2021 to be able to travel again. I'm due to start as the new chair of the Wellcome Trust in the UK in 2021. So I'm looking forward to being in London in the future and able to say hello to people in a more in-person way, if we're allowed to do that.
That sounds amazing. And we look forward to welcoming you when you come to London. And congratulations on your book. And so wonderful to have you with us here today. We're big admirers and fans of your work and look forward to hearing your voice for many, many years to come. Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you.